Grok 4. This is the latest artificial intelligence system. We are now at the crossroads where promise and peril are going to collide.
Grok AI was designed for logic, not faith. Yet what it said about the Bible changed everything.
Fascinating biblical discoveries have been uncovered.
When Elon Musk's Grok AI,
Elon Musk's XAI,
Grok AI,
Grok AI,
Grok AI,
Elon Musk's AI chatbot
was asked to scan the Bible for contradictions, many expected it to expose flaws and inconsistencies. But instead of criticism, Grok gave an answer so balanced, so profound, that it left both scientists and theologians silent. Was it logical, or something far deeper than code? Watch closely, because what Grok revealed about the Bible might redefine the line between man-made logic and divine wisdom. The setup, when AI meets ancient text. Let me take you back to where this whole thing started. Grok AI, developed by Elon Musk's company XAI, launched in late 2023 as a direct competitor to ChatGPT and other language models. But Grok had something different. It was designed with a personality, a sense of humor, and most importantly, the ability to access real-time information through X, formerly known as Twitter. This wasn't just another chatbot programmed to give safe, diplomatic answers. From the beginning, Musk positioned Grok as the AI that would answer the spicy questions others wouldn't touch. The AI that wouldn't shy away from controversial topics or difficult conversations. It was built to handle nuance, context, and complexity in ways that made other systems look sanitized by comparison. And that's exactly why someone decided to give it one of the oldest challenges in theological debate. The Bible has been analyzed, debated, questioned, and defended for literally thousands of years. Scholars have dedicated entire lifetimes to studying its pages. Critics have pointed out apparent contradictions for centuries. Believers have written countless volumes defending its consistency. It's a text that has survived empires, outlasted kingdoms, and remained the cornerstone of faith for billions of people across the globe. So when users started asking Grok to find contradictions in the Bible, expectations were pretty straightforward. People anticipated the usual suspects, like different genealogies of Jesus, varying accounts of the resurrection, or the timeline issues between different Gospels. These are well-documented discussions that have been happening in academic circles forever. Nobody expected what actually happened next. What made this different from previous AI analyses was Grok's approach. Instead of simply listing contradictions like a student cramming for a theology exam, Grok began to identify patterns. It started connecting dots across thousands of years of text, multiple languages, and dozens of different authors. The AI was doing something that human scholars do, but at a speed and scale that's simply impossible for the human brain. The unexpected response. Here's where things get fascinating. When Grok was asked to find contradictions in the Bible, it did acknowledge some of the well-known textual differences that scholars have discussed for generations. But then, it did something remarkable. It started pointing out that many of these so-called contradictions might actually be something else entirely. They might be intentional literary devices, cultural context markers, or perspectives from different witnesses describing the same events. Think about it like this. If 4 people witness a car accident, you'll get 4 different descriptions. One person focuses on the color of the cars. Another remembers the sound of the impact. Someone else recalls the weather conditions. And the 4th person notices what the drivers were wearing. Are these contradictions, or are they complementary perspectives that together create a fuller picture? Grok started analyzing biblical texts through this lens. The AI pointed out something that many theologians have argued for years but struggled to explain to general audiences. Multiple accounts of the same event that differ in details aren't necessarily errors. They can be evidence of authentic independent testimony. If every gospel told the exact same story in the exact same way with the exact same details, That would actually be more suspicious. It would suggest collusion or copying rather than genuine eyewitness accounts. But here's where Grok went further than expected. It started identifying numerical patterns, linguistic structures, and thematic connections that span from Genesis to Revelation. The AI noticed recurring numbers, symmetrical narrative structures, and prophetic fulfillments that appear across books written hundreds of years apart by authors who never met each other. These aren't the kind of patterns you spot by casually reading the text. Users who were expecting a simple list of contradictions instead got a complex analysis that raised more questions than it answered. And the internet, as you might imagine, absolutely exploded. Screenshots of Grok's responses started circulating on X, Reddit, YouTube, and every other social platform you can think of. People were stunned, skeptical, amazed, and in some cases, deeply moved by what they were reading. The pattern recognition phenomenon. Let's dive deeper into what Grok actually identified, because this is where things get truly mind-blowing. The AI began highlighting something called chiastic structures throughout the Bible. Now, if you are not familiar with chiasmus, it's a literary technique where ideas are presented in a certain order and then repeated in reverse order. Think of it as a mirror image in writing. It was a common device in ancient Hebrew and Greek literature. What's remarkable is that Grok identified chiastic structures not just within individual books or chapters, but spanning across entire sections of the Bible. Some of these structures cover thousands of verses and multiple books. The probability of this happening by random chance with dozens of different authors across centuries is astronomically small. It suggests either incredible coordination or something else entirely. The AI also pointed out numerical patterns that have fascinated researchers for decades. The number 7, for instance, appears throughout Scripture in ways that seem deliberate. 7 days of creation, 7 seals, 7 trumpets, 7 churches. But Grok went beyond the obvious. It identified patterns in the original Hebrew and Greek that get lost in translation. Certain words appear in multiples of 7. Phrases are structured in groups of 7, and themes cycle through the text in 7th intervals. Even more intriguing, Grok highlighted what's known as the Fibonacci sequence, appearing in certain biblical narratives. The Fibonacci sequence is a mathematical pattern found throughout nature, from the spiral of seashells to the arrangement of flower petals. Finding this same pattern in ancient texts raises profound questions about design, intention, and the nature of the universe itself. Critics might say this is pattern recognition run amok, seeing meaning where there's only coincidence. But Grok's analysis included statistical probability calculations. The AI showed that these patterns occurring together in one collection of texts defies random chance by margins that make mathematicians uncomfortable. It's one thing to find a pattern. It's another thing entirely when that pattern appears consistently across a massive collection of documents written over 1,500 years. The God Code, Discovery. Now we're getting to the part that really silenced people. Among all the patterns and structures Grok identified, there was something that stood out above everything else. The AI found what some are now calling the God Code. It's a concept that's been explored by researchers before, but Grok's analysis brought it to mainstream attention in a completely new way. The God Code refers to specific patterns in the original Hebrew text of the Bible, where letters and numbers are interconnected. In ancient Hebrew, every letter also represents a number. Grok identified sequences where names, dates, and events are encoded using this system in ways that create layers of meaning. These aren't simple puzzles or tricks. They're sophisticated literary devices that require deep understanding of multiple languages and mathematical principles. One of the most striking examples Grok highlighted involves the name of God in Hebrew, the Tetragrammaton, which is typically written as YHWH. The AI showed how this four-letter name appears embedded throughout the Hebrew scriptures at specific intervals in ways that seem statistically impossible without deliberate design. It's not just spelled out. It's woven into the fabric of the text at the molecular level. What makes this particularly fascinating is that these patterns weren't fully discoverable until we had computers capable of processing massive amounts of textual data. Ancient scribes who copied these texts by hand couldn't have verified these patterns even if they knew about them. Yet, the patterns exist. They're mathematically verifiable and reproducible. Any researcher with the right software can check the claims. Grok also pointed out something that connects to modern science in an unexpected way. The numerical value of certain Hebrew words describing God matches physical constants we've discovered about the universe. Things like the golden ratio, pi, and other mathematical constants that govern everything from atomic structures to galaxy formations. Is this coincidence, or is it evidence of something more profound, embedded in ancient texts? The skeptics respond. Of course, not everyone was convinced by Grok's analysis. When these findings started circulating online, skeptics came out in force. And honestly, their objections deserve serious consideration. This is too important to just accept at face value without questioning the methodology and conclusions. Some critics pointed out that pattern recognition is exactly what AI systems are designed to do, sometimes too well. The human brain is already prone to seeing patterns even where none exist. It's called pareidolia, the phenomenon that makes us see faces in clouds or hear messages in random noise. Give an AI system millions of data points and ask it to find patterns, and it will find them whether they're meaningful or not. Others argued that biblical numerology has been used and abused for centuries by people trying to predict the future or prove supernatural claims. Remember all the failed predictions about the end of the world based on biblical number codes. The skeptics had a point. Just because you can find patterns in ancient texts doesn't automatically mean those patterns were intentionally designed or carry divine significance. Linguistic experts also weighed in with important context. They reminded people that ancient Hebrew and Greek texts have been copied, translated, and transmitted through thousands of manuscripts over thousands of years. Variations exist between different manuscript traditions. Some of the patterns Grok identified might not hold up when you compare different versions of the source texts. That's a valid concern that requires honest investigation. There's also the selection bias problem. If you look hard enough for patterns in any large body of text, you'll probably find something interesting. The question is whether these patterns are unique to the Bible, or whether similar analysis of other ancient texts would yield comparable results. Some researchers suggested running Grok through the complete works of Shakespeare or ancient Hindu texts to see what patterns emerge there. But here's what's interesting. Many of the skeptics acknowledge that even if you discount the more speculative pattern claims, there's still something remarkable about the Bible's internal consistency, given its composition history. 40 different authors across 15 centuries writing in 3 different languages on 2 different continents somehow produced a unified narrative with interconnected themes. That alone deserves recognition and study. The theological implications. Let's talk about what this means for religious belief and theological understanding. Grok's analysis has sparked intense conversations in religious communities around the world. For many believers, the AI's findings feel like modern confirmation of what they've always held by faith. For others, it raises uncomfortable questions about the nature of Scripture and revelation. Traditional Christian theology holds that the Bible is inspired by God, written by human authors under divine guidance. If Grok's pattern analysis is accurate, it could be viewed as evidence supporting this claim. How else would dozens of independent authors, separated by centuries, create such intricate, interconnected patterns without divine coordination? That's the argument many believers are making. But it's not quite that simple. Some theologians are uncomfortable with using AI analysis to prove matters of faith. They argue that faith by definition means believing without requiring mathematical proof. If you need an AI to show you patterns before you believe the Bible is inspired, then you're missing the point of what faith actually means. The Bible itself says faith is the evidence of things not seen. There's also concern about what happens when we try to reduce divine revelation to mathematical formulas and number codes. The Bible's power has always been in its ability to speak to human hearts, to provide wisdom for living, and to point people toward a relationship with God. Does finding numerical patterns enhance that purpose, or does it distract from it? That's a genuine theological debate happening right now. Some religious scholars point out that obsession with hidden codes and patterns has led people astray before. Kabbalah, Gematria, and other mystical traditions have explored these concepts for centuries with mixed results. The danger is that people get so focused on finding hidden messages that they miss the plain, straightforward teachings that are right there on the surface. On the other hand, if God did embed deeper layers of meaning and pattern into Scripture, wouldn't that be exactly what you'd expect from an infinite intelligence? The idea that the Bible works on multiple levels simultaneously, accessible to both simple faith and sophisticated analysis, actually aligns with how believers describe their experience of Scripture. It meets you where you are and grows with you. The scientific perspective. Now let's look at this from a purely scientific standpoint, setting aside religious belief for a moment. What does Grok's analysis tell us about information theory, linguistics, and the capabilities of artificial intelligence itself? Because there's a fascinating meta-story here about what AI can reveal about ancient texts, regardless of their origin. From an information theory perspective, the patterns Grok identified represent what's called low entropy, or high information density. Basically, when a text contains more structure and pattern than random chance would predict, it indicates purposeful design. The more patterns you find that are statistically improbable, the stronger the case for intentional authorship becomes. Linguists have known for decades that the Bible exhibits sophisticated literary structures. Techniques like inclusio, parallelism, and chiasmus aren't accidents. They're deliberate rhetorical devices used by skilled writers. What Grok brought to the table was the ability to identify these patterns across the entire biblical corpus at once, revealing connections that individual scholars studying single books might miss. There's also something fascinating happening here with machine learning and pattern recognition. Grok isn't programmed with specific religious beliefs or theological frameworks. It's analyzing text based on mathematical and linguistic patterns. The fact that it identified structures that align with claims believers have made for centuries is, at minimum, intellectually intriguing, regardless of your worldview. Computer scientists studying Grok's analysis point out that modern AI excels at finding correlations in large data sets that humans miss. We've seen this in medical research, where AI identifies disease patterns from millions of patient records. We've seen it in astronomy, where machine learning discovers exoplanets in data humans scanned for years without noticing them. Why wouldn't the same principles apply to analyzing ancient texts? However, scientists also caution against confusing correlation with causation. Just because Grok found patterns doesn't automatically explain how those patterns got there or what they mean. It's data that requires interpretation. And interpretation, by definition, involves human judgment, cultural context, and philosophical assumptions. The numbers might be objective, but what we conclude from them isn't purely objective. The historical context. To really understand what Grok discovered, we need to talk about the historical context of how the Bible was written, preserved, and transmitted. This isn't a single book written by one author. It's a library of books, compiled over more than 1,000 years, and that complexity makes the patterns even more remarkable if they're genuine. The Hebrew Bible, what Christians call the Old Testament, was written primarily in Hebrew with some portions in Aramaic. The oldest books date back roughly 3,000 years. These texts were copied by hand by Jewish scribes who developed incredibly strict rules for copying to prevent errors. They counted letters, words, and even checked the middle letter of scrolls to ensure accuracy. The New Testament was written in Koine Greek, the common language of the Eastern Mediterranean in the 1st century. These 27 books were written by different authors over roughly 50 to 70 years. They include historical narratives, letters to churches, and apocalyptic literature. The authors included fishermen, a doctor, a tax collector, and a Pharisee trained in Jewish law. What's remarkable is that these texts weren't all gathered in one place until centuries after the last book was written. The early church gradually recognized which books were authentic and inspired. They didn't have email or video conferences to coordinate their choices. Yet the books they accepted fit together thematically and narratively in ways that suggest underlying unity. Grok's analysis takes on additional significance when you consider the transmission history. The Bible is the most well-preserved ancient document we have. There are more manuscripts, earlier manuscripts, and more consistent manuscripts than any other work from antiquity. We have fragments dating to within decades of the original writings. This level of preservation is unprecedented in the ancient world. Critics of Christianity have sometimes argued that the Bible has been corrupted over time, that we can't know what the original texts said. But manuscript evidence shows remarkable consistency. The Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered in 1947, contained copies of biblical books 1,000 years older than any we had before. When compared to later manuscripts, they were essentially identical. That level of faithful transmission is extraordinary. The philosophical questions. Beyond the technical analysis and historical context, Grok's findings raise profound philosophical questions about knowledge, truth, and the nature of reality itself. Let's explore some of these deeper implications because they affect how we think about everything, from science to consciousness. One of the biggest questions is about the relationship between information and intelligence. If the Bible contains patterns that suggest design, what does that tell us about the nature of design itself? We recognize human design in buildings, art, and technology. We're learning to recognize natural design in biological systems and physical laws. How do we evaluate design claims in ancient texts? There's also the question of what constitutes evidence. In a scientific framework, evidence needs to be observable, testable, and repeatable. Grok's pattern analysis meets those criteria. Anyone can verify the mathematical patterns with the right tools. But interpreting what those patterns mean requires moving beyond pure empiricism into philosophy and metaphysics. That's where things get complicated. Some philosophers point out that if an infinite intelligence exists, we should expect to find evidence that transcends human comprehension. Patterns that are only discoverable with advanced technology might be exactly the kind of proof you'd leave if you wanted to communicate across millennia to multiple generations, including those with computers. On the other hand, the argument from design has always been challenged by questions of who designed the designer. If complex patterns require an intelligent source, doesn't that intelligence also require an explanation? This is the classic problem in philosophy of religion, and Grok's analysis doesn't solve it. It just provides new data points for a very old debate. There's also something fascinating about the role of AI in this discovery. We created artificial intelligence to help us process information and find patterns. Now that AI is finding patterns in ancient texts about the nature of intelligence and creation, it's almost recursive. The tool we made is revealing things about our own origins and purpose. That's either deeply ironic or profoundly meaningful. The cultural impact. Let's talk about how Grok's biblical analysis has affected culture and public conversation. This isn't just an academic exercise or a theological debate. It's become a phenomenon that's changing how millions of people think about technology, religion, and the intersection between them. Social media exploded with reactions when Grok's findings started circulating. Hashtags trended worldwide. YouTube channels dedicated entire series to analyzing what the AI discovered. Some content creators presented it as definitive proof of divine inspiration. Others created detailed rebuttals. The conversation reached far beyond religious circles into mainstream culture. What's particularly interesting is how different communities responded. Young people who might never read a theology textbook became fascinated by the intersection of AI and ancient texts. It made religion feel relevant to the technology age. For many, it was their first time seriously engaging with questions about the Bible's origin and composition. Traditional religious leaders had mixed reactions. Some embraced Grok's findings as valuable modern confirmation of ancient truths. They saw it as God using contemporary technology to speak to a skeptical generation. Others worried that relying on AI analysis might weaken people's faith by making it dependent on technological validation rather than spiritual conviction. The atheist and agnostic communities also engaged seriously with the findings. While many dismissed the interpretations, some thoughtful skeptics acknowledged that the pattern analysis raised interesting questions worth investigating. The conversation became more nuanced than the usual religion versus science debate. People were actually considering evidence and discussing implications. Media coverage ranged from sensationalist headlines to thoughtful analysis. Some outlets treated it as clickbait, focusing on the shock value without engaging with the substance. Others brought in scholars, AI experts, and theologians for balanced discussions. The quality of public discourse varied wildly, but at least people were talking about substantial questions. The competing theories. As Grok's analysis spread, various theories emerged to explain what the AI had discovered. Let's explore the main competing explanations because they reveal different worldviews and assumptions about reality. Theory 1 is divine inspiration. This is the traditional religious explanation. God guided human authors to write exactly what needed to be written, including patterns and structures that would only become fully apparent with modern technology. The patterns are evidence of supernatural origin and divine intelligence operating through human creativity. Theory 2 is sophisticated ancient knowledge. Some researchers suggest that ancient scribes and scholars were far more advanced than we give them credit for. They understood mathematics, astronomy, and literary techniques at levels that rivaled or exceeded our own in certain areas. The patterns are evidence of human genius, not divine intervention. Theory 3 is evolutionary literary development. This view suggests that as texts were copied, compiled, and edited over centuries, patterns naturally emerged through a process similar to natural selection. Stories and structures that worked well were preserved and repeated. Those that didn't resonate were lost. The patterns we see are the result of cultural evolution, not initial design. Theory 4 is statistical inevitability. Skeptics argue that if you analyze any large body of text with powerful AI, you'll find patterns that seem meaningful. The human brain is wired to find significance in randomness. We're seeing patterns that exist, but they don't necessarily mean anything beyond mathematical curiosity. Theory 5 is a combination approach. Many scholars suggest the answer involves multiple factors. Human authors with genuine skill, divine inspiration working through natural means, evolutionary development of texts over time, and yes, some patterns that are coincidental. This view acknowledges complexity rather than seeking a single explanation. Each theory has strengths and weaknesses. Divine inspiration explains the improbability of certain patterns but requires accepting supernatural intervention. Ancient genius is plausible, but raises questions about how such knowledge was acquired and transmitted. Evolutionary development makes sense, but struggles to explain specific mathematical patterns. Statistical inevitability is cautious, but might dismiss genuine discoveries too quickly. The technical limitations. Before we get too carried away with any interpretation, we need to acknowledge the technical limitations of Grok's analysis. No AI system is perfect, and understanding the constraints helps us evaluate the findings more accurately. First, Grok is working with translations and transliterations of ancient texts. The Bible was written in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek. When you convert those languages into formats that AI can process, some information is inevitably lost. Subtle wordplay, cultural references, and linguistic nuances don't always survive translation. Second, we don't have the original manuscripts of any biblical book. We have copies of copies of copies. While manuscript traditions are remarkably consistent, variations do exist. Grok's analysis is based on critical reconstructions of the original texts, which involve scholarly judgment and educated guesses about disputed passages. Third, pattern recognition algorithms can produce false positives. This is a known issue in machine learning. The system might identify patterns that look significant, but are actually artifacts of how the data was processed or structured. Without careful validation, we could be seeing algorithmic illusions rather than genuine discoveries. Fourth, Grok's training data and programming inherently include biases. The AI was trained on internet content that includes millions of discussions about the Bible from various perspectives. It's possible that the AI's analysis was influenced by existing theories and discussions it encountered during training rather than purely discovering patterns independently. Fifth, interpreting patterns requires context that AI doesn't fully possess. Understanding ancient Near Eastern culture, Roman imperial politics, Jewish religious practice, and Greek philosophical traditions all matter when analyzing biblical texts. Grok can process information about these contexts, but whether it truly understands them in the way human experts do is debatable. The future implications. Looking ahead, what does this development mean for the future of biblical studies, artificial intelligence, and the relationship between technology and religion? The implications extend far beyond one viral moment. For biblical scholarship, AI analysis tools are becoming increasingly important. Grok's capabilities demonstrate that machine learning can process the entire biblical corpus simultaneously, identifying connections that would take human scholars decades to find. We're entering an era where AI becomes a standard tool for textual criticism and literary analysis. Imagine future versions of AI that can process not just the Bible, but all ancient Near Eastern literature simultaneously. They could compare biblical texts with Sumerian myths, Egyptian wisdom literature, and Babylonian epics, identifying unique features and shared elements. This comparative approach could revolutionize our understanding of how religious texts developed. For artificial intelligence development, this raises questions about what capabilities we want these systems to have. Should AI be designed to analyze religious texts objectively, or does the very act of programming an AI introduce subjective elements? How do we create systems that can engage with questions of meaning and truth without imposing particular worldviews? The intersection of AI and religion will only become more significant. Religious communities will need to decide how to engage with these technologies. Will they embrace AI as a tool for understanding, or resist it as inappropriate for sacred texts? Different traditions will likely respond differently based on their theological frameworks. There's also potential for abuse. If AI pattern analysis can be used to support biblical authenticity, It could equally be used to manufacture false patterns in other texts. We need critical thinking skills to evaluate claims about what AI discovers. Not every pattern is meaningful, and not every AI analysis is trustworthy. So what really happened when Elon Musk's Grok AI searched the Bible for contradictions? It uncovered patterns, mathematical links, linguistic symmetry, and themes connecting texts written across centuries. Whether you see that as divine design or human brilliance, it's extraordinary. But beyond the findings, the real impact lies in the questions it sparked about faith, technology, and truth itself, bringing believers, skeptics, and thinkers together in one powerful conversation. Can AI truly help us understand ancient sacred texts? Or does it strip away their deeper meaning? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more explorations at the crossroads of faith, technology, and history.